Hi, I'm Michael Kourosh. I live in Santa Barbara, California, one of the most beautiful places on earth. My design center is where people come to reimagine their homes and spaces. I work with the best designers, clients with broad tastes, and experts who navigate the fascinating world of design. I'm always excited to learn something new, and I never say no to a challenge. This is Design Santa Barbara. Welcome to Design Santa Barbara. I'm Michael Kourosh, and today we are in Santa Barbara Design Center, where I'm excited to welcome a very special guest. I have always been fascinated by Egypt, and this week we are going to be speaking with Nick Brown, who is an archaeologist, Egyptologist, and historian. Nick, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for welcome, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for having me.
Is it fascinating? You live in Egypt and you have done all these things. We're going to ask you questions,
Yeah.
and our audience would love to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. My first question, how did your passion for Egypt and archaeology develop?
Yeah. So I fell in love with Egypt and archaeology when I was a kid. So got my first book on ancient Egypt probably when I was about 6 years old. And just got fascinated with mummies and pyramids and golden treasure and kind of the adventure of the job. And as I got older, I realized I love history and I love to travel. And so archaeology is kind of the perfect job for that. But I think really what solidified my, wanting to be an Egyptologist was my first trip to Egypt in 2011. So went there for excavation work and ended up falling in love with the people and the culture and the country, and really just knew in that moment that Egypt was where I wanted to work for the rest of my career.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. You're lucky.
Yeah.
You do what things you have done, you wanted to do as a kid.
Yeah.
Good for you. What was it like going from Southern California to Cairo?
Yeah.
That must have been a different life.
Yeah, almost a 180 shift. I love Cairo. I'll start out by saying that it is chaotic but exciting, and it's a big city and it's very international. A group of people living there and working there as well, and it's a lot different from Southern California. So I think here we're a little bit more relaxed and slower pace of life perhaps, but over there certainly there's a lot of hustle and bustle, and definitely a different culture from our own, and so there's a lot of culture shock when I first moved there as well. And they speak Arabic and we speak English, and so it's having to learn a new foreign language. And as overwhelming as the experience was when I first moved there, now I definitely consider it home away from home.
A lot of people, don't they come and say, is it safe? Mm-hmm. And my answer is, it is safer than being in Chicago or East LA. But what is your experience on that?
Yeah, no, I think I absolutely agree with that as well. I think it's a very safe place to visit, and while certain unfortunate events do happen every once in a while in the region in general, it's like you said, that similar things are happening here in the States, and so it's in some ways unfair to say it's not safe to go there and yet it's safe to be here as well. And so I encourage everyone to take a chance, go visit Egypt if you can. It's a wonderful place.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. What kind of training did you have to go through before you actually went out into the field?
Yeah. So I grew up in Santa Barbara County, and I did my bachelor's degree at UC Santa Barbara. So I got a degree in archaeology, and so in my classes and in some kind of hands-on training here in Southern California, learned the different techniques and skills that you need to be an archaeologist, and ended up doing my first excavation experience in Egypt back in 2011, which was also my first trip to Egypt ever. But signed up to do what we call a field school. So you go out in the desert, You're living the excavation life. You're hands-on kind of excavating and digging up the archaeological remains. And so that's kind of how I started and learned how to be an archaeologist. And then over the years, I've had the great opportunity to participate in a number of excavations. And through that, have learned and developed different skills and techniques for my career.
But you got your educated part in UCSB, and then you moved there to get your practical.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you got lucky going to Egypt straight. I mean, that must have been dream of every student in that class.
Yeah, no, I lucked out, absolutely. So I initially moved to Cairo to start my master's degree at the American University in Cairo. So while I was a student in graduate school in Cairo, I at the same time was also getting this hands-on excavation experience while living there.
Good for you. Good for you. So tell us about your experience working at actual archaeological dig. That's what you were going to
Yeah. So it is not the life for everybody. I love it. It's my absolute favorite thing. It can be long days usually. So we, because of excavating in the desert and how hot it can get, our days usually start much earlier than a normal work day, and we end earlier. So you can be up at 5, out in the field by 6. You're out digging and excavating for a few hours, and then by the time it gets too hot to be out there, say probably about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you pack everything up, head home, and in the evening, once you've had a nap and kind of rested up a little bit, is when you process all your paperwork and all the finds that you found that day, and do that kind of work as well. So kind of the administrative work, if you will, for the excavation. But yeah, in the field, it's pretty amazing, the work and what we do. And the reason I love it so much is every day is different, and you don't know what you're going to find that day. So some days can be boring and you don't really find anything, versus other days where it's just back to back. You find new artifacts or new deposits of archaeological remains, or say a new burial or a new house or something to find and uncover. So
how hot does it get usually?
Yeah, the hottest I've ever worked in on an excavation was 114 degrees Fahrenheit. So,
oh my goodness.
It can get pretty hot. And that day, actually, we all decided, you know what, I think it's time we're gonna call it early today.
Let's go for a mojito.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that was pretty brutal. But usually, I would say on average between the 80s and the 90s. So pretty warm.
Yeah, it's not too hot, but
yeah.
I bet you it's not that comfortable.
Yeah, when you're in the middle of the desert with no shade, it suddenly becomes much hotter than you think it is. So, yeah.
Another question before we go to the break. Talk about what it was like being hands-on with actual sarcophagus and mummies.
Yeah. So
and before we go there, have you ever dug one out?
Yeah, absolutely. So my specialty within Egyptology is what we would call funerary archaeology. So I excavate cemeteries and mummies and study the material culture, or like the objects that people are buried with. So this is kind of my niche within the field. So I've excavated at a number of cemeteries in Egypt and in the Sudan, as well as a tomb down in Luxor as well. And it's a pretty amazing experience, to be honest. I know it's a sensitive topic with many different people about, exhuming human remains and studying them, and is it respectful? Are you being disrespectful? And the way I see it is the work that we're doing as archaeologists by, excavating these cemeteries, studying these deceased people, we're really helping to write the unwritten stories of history. So usually these people, their lifestyle, how they died, what they died from, all this information that we're getting from studying these human remains, that's not recorded down on papyri or temple walls or, in Greek histories of ancient Egypt or anything like this. So I think the work that we're doing while excavating and dealing with human remains is really important. And I always cite one of my favorite discoveries that I've ever made as an archaeologist was we were excavating this cemetery at a place called Amarna in Middle Egypt. And most of the burials that we were dealing with had been looted in antiquity. So thieves had come in, kind of torn apart the bodies, looking for jewelry or amulets or other objects. and all the graves were kind of turned over in a mess. But I ended up finding one of the few intact burials at that cemetery that season we were digging. And I think for me, the really moving moment of that experience was as I'm kind of cleaning this grave and dealing with these human remains, I realized that I was the first person to actually be at that place in over 3,000 years.
Wow.
So they had buried the person in ancient Egypt and antiquity, and then I came along 3,000 years later and was the next person in that story, or in that moment. So yeah, that was pretty moving and pretty incredible, to be honest. So.
Lucky you. Perhaps he was happy seeing you.
Yeah.
3,000 years he hasn't seen nobody.
He
there
might
you
have been
are.
a bit lonely.
Handsome
Exactly.
American dude comes along. Here we go.
Exactly.
Well, that's all very fascinating.
Yeah.
When we come back, I will talk more with Nick about Egyptian culture and influence on design. Stay tuned. We will be back with more Design Santa Barbara. It's been an interesting time for all of us. It was difficult to be separated from the world, but I was incredibly lucky to be able to spend much time with my family. Being home for so long showed us just how important our living spaces are and why proper design is essential. If you are ready to redefine your living space, come in and see me. It would be my honor to help you. We are Santa Barbara Design Center at 410 Olive Street, and we are ready. Welcome back. This week we are speaking with the archaeologist, Egyptologist, and historian Nick Brown. Nick, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
I have more questions.
Yeah,
Has been an exciting show with you in it. What fascinates you about Egyptian history?
Yeah, there's a ton of different things that fascinate me about ancient Egyptian history. It's really great as an archaeologist and a scholar to have an ancient civilization that was around essentially for 5,000 years with pretty much uninterrupted history and culture and societal norms and stuff. So I have basically this long span of time that I can really study human behavior and societal development, if you will, over a period of time. And it's great, as an archaeologist and historian to look to our past and to study history to then better understand where we are today and where we potentially are going in the future. And so there's essentially this kind of long duration, if you will, of human existence. And the people back then certainly were acting like we are today. And I think this is another aspect of Egyptian history that I love so much. When you study these ancient people and you really get into what they were writing down and what they were talking about and how they were living their lives from the archaeological remains, what you find is they're feeling the same emotions we are. They're having the same kind of bickering arguments with their neighbors like we do. They have the same hopes and fears for their families. So it's pretty amazing to look back, some 3,000-4,000 years ago and see that the people were just like us. So it's almost like you could take a character from ancient Egypt and put them into our society today and they'd fit in just fine.
So wonderful. It is,
Yeah.
we are wherever we go, we are all the same, despite a lot of people think they're all different. Even
Yeah.
back then, they were the same as they are today.
Exactly. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Is there a particular location in Egypt that interests you more than the rest?
So I am really fascinated with the Valley of the Kings. And this is one of my favorite sites in Egypt and one of my favorite places to study. This essentially is a cemetery for the pharaohs during the New Kingdom. So this is roughly 1500 BC to 1000 BC is when this necropolis or this area...
Just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Just not too long ago. But essentially this necropolis is really fascinating because it's a series of tombs that were built for kings of the New Kingdom. And what's interesting is it had such a dynamic life during its use as a royal necropolis, but then it has this really interesting afterlife, if you will, after the New Kingdom period when Egypt experiences this political and social crisis or instability to the point where several tombs and people's homes were being robbed and there was rampant looting, and There was even state-sanctioned looting of older tombs as well. Their economic crisis was so severe, they were like, you know what, we've got to go into these tombs, we've got to mine them for all their golden treasure, and we've got to recirculate that into the economy. And so this site, the Valley of the Kings, it's just really fascinating to, when you really get into it and look at the history and the stories that were happening there, you realize it was a really dynamic landscape that had a ton of human interaction in it for, you know, close to 1,000 years. So
wow, I study history quite a lot, but that's the very first time I hear that the new pharaohs go rob the old pharaohs' tombs.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
to us it seems, you know, kind of like sacrilegious maybe for the Egyptians, or like something that would be unheard of, but we have the archaeological evidence, we have papyri and documents that talk about all this looting and theft. And even we have a few royal caches or kind of secret hiding spots for the mummies and the coffins of these older kings that after they were stripped of all their gold jewelry and golden coffins and everything, they were kind of rewrapped, placed into new kind of, or new coffins and placed within these secret hiding caches. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's very interesting. That's amazing. Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Ancient Egypt has been of great focus since Howard Carter and his team made their discovery in 1922.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and how it affects the modern worldview of Egyptian culture?
Yeah, totally. So we're, I think in Egyptology, and for those of us who are interested in ancient Egypt, we're at a very exciting moment in time right now, because next year is the 100-year anniversary or the centennial of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. And this was a nearly intact tomb that Howard Carter and his financier, Lord Carnarvon, discovered in the Valley of the Kings in November of 1922. And really before it and since, there hasn't been any kind of archaeological discovery quite like it. I mean, the tomb was nearly intact, all kinds of, you know, not only golden treasure and golden jewelry, but many different kinds of daily life objects that the king would have used. We even have like his pairs of underwear, for instance, or the toys he played with as a kid. So really a number of fascinating and interesting artifacts to study and really look at from this tomb. And, you know, as this tomb was being excavated and these objects were being brought out, the discovery of this tomb really fueled a new fascination with ancient Egypt and definitely caught the public's interest. Tutankhamun and his golden mask is such an icon of ancient Egypt, if really not the ancient world. Most people, I think, would recognize it if they saw a photo of it. And it's still, you know, him as a ruler, his tomb as an archaeological discovery, it still really captivates us and catches our imagination and gets us to really be in awe and, you know, admiration of the ancient Egyptians.
Yeah, that's amazing, actually. There was actually a few years ago, they brought it to LACMA, and we went there to get a tour out of it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't bring most important items, but they brought a few that you can look into. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And even the objects from that tomb, like the ones that came to LACMA, for instance, that you think are maybe more simplistic or not, you know, as flashy as like the golden mask or anything, they still just have such an artistic value and just such an amazing capability of just capturing your interest and your attention.
It gives you goosebumps,
Yeah.
really it does. If you look at them and it's just like...
Exactly. And then, you know, when you are able to put it in perspective of how old these items are, these artifacts are, you know, thousands of years ago, somebody was painting this bust or, you know, making this chair or whatever. And then here we are, you know, in the early 2000s, getting to look at it in Los Angeles, half a world away. It's just something else.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Looking at the world today, do you see influences in design that stem from ancient Egypt?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's, especially in the, let's say like the 1920s, there was, after the discovery of Tut's tomb, which we were just talking about, there was a influx or this kind of explosion of Egyptian style like motifs and decoration and architectural elements that took place in like New York and London, other cities throughout Europe as well. And so it's really cool as you're walking around these older cities and you see kind of like, oh, like those are like Egyptian columns, or like that's an Egyptian like door lintel, or oh, there's like fake hieroglyphs written on this wall, or there's some pretty fun stuff out there we call it in Egyptology, Egyptomania, if you will. And it's pretty exciting and fun to see that kind of stuff around as well. And I know ancient Egypt has influenced movies and television, and there's been all kinds of film productions made about ancient Egypt as well, and where Hollywood gets a bit creative and uses their imagination on some aspects, but at the same time they also are able to disseminate, I guess, information and knowledge to the public as well. So,
yeah, that's true. And if you go to ancient European cities, they always have these columns, and they have the...
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think the columns that you're mentioning, these obelisks from ancient Egypt, carved with hieroglyphs on all four sides, there are more standing obelisks outside of Egypt than there are in Egypt today, because the ancient Romans and the modern Europeans and Americans, essentially took them out of Egypt and re-erected them in Europe or in America. And so, yeah, Egypt still has a few that are standing and left,
but more of them outside.
More of them are outside than actually inside.
Well, it's very all fascinating to everybody. Thank you. After the break, we are going to be talking more about archaeology and modern advances in the field of antiquity. We will be right back. Welcome back to Design Santa Barbara. I'm talking with Nick Brown about his passion and his study of Egyptology and archaeology. Nick, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
It has been the most interesting conversation with you, my friend. Thank you. When people think of archaeology, they often envision Indiana Jones. I was hoping you come with the hat and the and treasure hunting. Can you tell us about the modern advances in how you work?
Yeah, absolutely. So while Indiana Jones is super fun and really entertaining, it's really
damn good.
Yeah. So I love the movies. They're really some of my favorite from childhood, but it's really not what actual archaeological work is like. So I'm sorry to break it to you, but it is, in the past few decades especially, there's been a lot of technological advances within the field of archaeology and in the way we do excavation work, or really, I should say, a lack of excavating. And what I mean by this is there's all kinds of new radars and radar sonar tools, as well as imaging software and satellite imaging that we use as well to really find and locate sites and archaeological deposits. And what's great about this kind of technology is that we're able to use it to map and to see what's buried beneath the sand without actually ever having to pick up a shovel or having to dig. And this is great for us as archaeologists because it lets us kind of explore and see more of, say, of sight if we find something. Invest more time in, say, doing the imaging rather than actually having to dig, which can be a slow and laborious process. But in addition to that, it's also important and good for the field because it helps to preserve the archaeological remains, right? You're not having to expose them to the elements. And that's the thing with archaeology is it is very much a destructive science in that as we're excavating a site, we're removing deposits and removing layers which can't be put back into place. That's why it's so important for, say, an archaeologist to do an excavation instead of, treasure hunter or a looter or something like this, because even though we as well are, say, destroying a site, with all the records that we keep, with all the notes that we take, the way that we actually remove these materials and preserve them helps to preserve the archaeological data and the integrity of the site as much as possible.
So another question, is there a specific mystery that you hope to one day resolve?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there's still, a number of, say, missing tombs of famous kings that we've yet to find in Egypt. We still haven't found a lot of the cemeteries of like the lower class people, or kind of, again, as I was speaking about earlier, these unwritten histories or these unwritten stories of history. And so those are the kinds of things and research questions that I'm interested to look at and to study and discover, really, if you will. And so hopefully one day, that can be kind of my mark or my contribution to the field.
After you complete your PhD, will you be going back to Egypt?
Yeah, I hope so. So the great thing about being an Egyptologist is I will always have work in Egypt, and I'll always have to return back to Egypt, whether it's working at the museums in Cairo studying artifacts, whether it's working on archaeological excavation, trying to discover new artifacts. It's really a privilege to be able to continually go over there and work there and have a career base there.
As we move forward in time, what can we learn by looking back at ancient Egypt?
Yeah. So I think
it goes back to the first question we had.
Yeah.
You said we are same.
Exactly. No, and I would repeat that here as well. I think it's so important to realize that, again, by studying our past, we're able to better understand and know where we are and where we're going as a society, as a people. And I think it's so important to, look back and see what has happened and how, things were affected by, say, the government ruling at the time then, or the pharaoh ruling as a supreme leader, authoritarian leader, and to learn these different lessons. And so I think that's, really, really key and really important for my work. So, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Very good.
Yeah.
It has been a true pleasure having you on our show.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to once again thank Nick Brown for joining us today and sharing so much incredible information. We hope you have enjoyed it as well as always. We welcome you to go out and learn about this rich culture and its countless centuries of history. Please join us again next week on Design Santa Barbara.